Picture a room on the second floor of a house in Jerusalem. The plaster is cracked. A single oil lamp throws long shadows across a low table, and around that table sit 12 men. They are not kings. They are not scholars. Look closely and you will see fishermen with scarred hands. A tax collector everyone in town used to hate. A young man, barely old enough to grow a beard. One of them still smells of the sea. One of them is already thinking about money. And within 40 years, almost every man in this room will be dead, killed in places they have never heard of, in ways too brutal to put on a postcard. A spear in southern India, an X-shaped cross in Greece, a knife in Armenia, an upside-down crucifixion in the capital of the world. But here is the strange part. Here is the thing I want you to hold on to for the next 20 minutes. Out of these 12 men, one of them will die old, in his own bed, quietly, and it will not be the traitor. Remember that. One of them gets to grow old, and it is the last man you would expect. We will come back to him, but not yet. There is a word in the original Greek of the New Testament, martyrs. We almost never say it, but you use its child every single day. Martyrs means witness, someone who saw a thing with their own eyes and tells you what they saw. And from that one Greek word, martyrs, we get our English word, martyr. Sit with that for a second. The word for someone who dies for what they believe. It started as the word for someone who simply tells the truth about what they saw. That is not an accident. That is the whole story. So this is not a story about 12 names on a Sunday school list. This is not a story about stained glass windows. This is not a story about dusty, faraway history. This is a story about what a human being will and will not die for. And by the end, you are going to have to answer a very uncomfortable question about your own life. Let me show you how each of them died. And let me be honest with you the whole way, because 2 of these deaths are written plainly in the Bible, and the other 10 come from something older and shakier called church tradition. I will tell you which is which. I will not lie to you to make a better video. Let's start with the first one to fall. So let's start where the Bible itself starts the bleeding. His name was James. Not the James who would later lead the church in Jerusalem, a different one. This James was the son of a fisherman named Zebedee, and the brother of a man we will come back to at the very end. Jesus once called these 2 brothers the sons of thunder, and you get the feeling it was not entirely a compliment. They were loud, they were ambitious. They once asked Jesus if they could sit at his right and his left hand when he came into his kingdom. They wanted the good seats. James got a sword instead. In the 12th chapter of Acts, in one short, cold sentence, we are told that King Herod killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. That's it. No long farewell, no speech. The first of the 12 to die, and the Bible gives him 11 words. He was beheaded in Jerusalem, somewhere around the year 44, barely a decade after he watched the empty tomb. Here's what most people miss. This is the one apostle's death the New Testament actually records as it happens. One of only 2, and there is an old account passed down by the historian Eusebius that says the soldier who led James to his execution was so shaken by the way James faced death, no fear, no begging, that the soldier confessed he was a Christian too, right there. And the 2 of them were beheaded together. The man who came to kill him died beside him, a son of thunder, silenced in one sentence. That's where it begins. Now stay with me, because the next one you already know. You know him as the man who denied Jesus 3 times before a rooster crowed twice. Simon Peter, the fisherman with the big mouth and the soft heart. the one who swore he would die for Jesus, and then, hours later, swore to a servant girl that he had never met the man. If you have ever failed someone you loved, if you have ever said the brave thing and then done the cowardly thing, Peter is your apostle. He is the patron saint of everyone who blew it. And here is the part that should stop you cold. The man who once denied Jesus to save his own skin would, about 30 years later, refuse to deny him to save his own life. Tradition. And here I want to be honest. This comes from early church writers like Origen and Tertullian, not from the Bible itself. Tradition says Peter was crucified in Rome under the Emperor Nero around the year 64 to 67 during a vicious wave of persecution. And it says that when they came to nail him to a cross, Peter said he was not worthy to die the same way his Lord had died. So he asked to be crucified upside down. Think about what kind of change has to happen inside a man for that to be true. The same Peter who couldn't admit he knew Jesus to a teenage servant, now hanging inverted on a Roman cross, the blood rushing to his head, the city of Caesar watching, and he will not take it back. Whatever Peter saw between that rooster's crow and that cross, it rewired him completely. That is not the behavior of a man who is hoping something is true. That is the behavior of a man who knows. But it gets stranger, because Peter was not the only one in his family who would die on a cross. Peter had a brother. His name was Andrew, and before either of them ever met Jesus, it was Andrew who found his brother first and dragged him to meet this teacher from Nazareth. Andrew is almost always introduced the same way in the Gospels. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, the younger sibling, the one who is forever someone else's brother. If you have ever lived in the shadow of a louder, more famous family member, you know exactly who Andrew is. But watch what happens to the quiet one. Tradition says Andrew carried the message far north and west, into the region around Greece, to a city called Patras. And there, a Roman governor ordered him crucified. But the old accounts say Andrew was not nailed to an upright cross like his brother. He was bound, not nailed, to a cross shaped like the letter X. To this day, that shape is called St. Andrew's Cross, and you have seen it without knowing it on the flag of Scotland, woven into the flag of the United Kingdom. And here is the detail that has echoed for 2,000 years. Because he was tied instead of nailed, Andrew did not die quickly. The accounts say he hung there for 2 days, and instead of cursing, instead of screaming, he preached to the crowd that had gathered to watch him die. The quiet brother used his last 2 days of breath to tell them about the man he had met by the sea. They say he refused to be taken down. He had found something worth bleeding 2 days for. 1 family, 2 brothers, 2 crosses, 1 pointed up, 1 shaped like an X, the loud one and the quiet one both refusing to take it back. Are you starting to feel the pattern? 3 men so far, 3 graves, and not one of them recanted. Let me stop here for just a moment, because there is something you need to know before we go any further. Everything I just told you about Peter and Andrew, the upside-down cross, the 2 days of preaching, I want you to know that none of it is in the Bible. Not one word. Those stories come from church tradition, from writers who lived 100, 200, sometimes 300 years after these men died. Some of it is probably true. Some of it grew in the retelling, the way stories do. A modern scholar named Sean McDowell spent years ranking how solid each of these accounts really is, and his honest answer is, some are rock solid and some are shaky. I am telling you this on purpose because the easy thing would be to sell you 12 dramatic death scenes and let you believe every detail. But you came here for the truth, not for a better story. And the strange thing is that the truth is actually stronger. So if these stories matter to you, do me a favor, subscribe and turn on the bell. Not for me. Because the channel that tells you when it is guessing is worth coming back to. And drop one word in the comments right now, the name of the apostle whose death you most want to understand. I read them. I am watching for it. Now, let me show you the man who traveled the farthest to die. His name was Thomas, and history has not been kind to his reputation. We gave him a nickname he never asked for. Doubting Thomas. The patron saint of skeptics, because when the other disciples told him they had seen Jesus alive again after the crucifixion, Thomas did the most human thing in the entire Bible. He said no. He said, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were, I will not believe it." He was not going to be fooled. He was not going to let grief trick him into hoping. And I love him for it, because Thomas tells us something important about these men. They were not gullible. They were not a crowd of dreamers ready to believe anything. At least one of them flatly refused to accept the resurrection on the word of his closest friends. He demanded evidence. He wanted to touch the wounds. So here is the question that should keep you up at night. What does a hardened skeptic do after he gets his evidence? He goes to the ends of the earth. Tradition says Thomas traveled farther than any of them, not west into Europe, but east, all the way to India. Think about what that means in the 1st century. No roads you would recognize, no maps, monsoon seas, a language he did not speak, gods he had never heard of. The doubter became the explorer. The man who would not take one step on someone else's word walked thousands of miles on the strength of his own. And here is the part nobody tells you. It is not just a legend. On the southwest coast of India, there is a community of Christians who, to this day, call themselves the St. Thomas Christians. They trace their faith back, by their own account, to the apostle who walked into their land almost 2,000 years ago. Tradition says he was finally killed near a city now called Chennai, run through with a spear on a hill that still bears his name. The doubter died on the far side of the world with a spear in his chest for the thing he once swore he would never believe without proof. Stay with me, because the next death is the hardest one to hear. His name was Bartholomew. You might know him by his other name, Nathaniel, the one Jesus called a man with no deceit in him, an honest man, the first time they ever met. Of all the 12, Bartholomew is one of the most faceless to us. He says almost nothing in the Gospels. He performs no famous act. He is just there, faithful in the background. But the tradition surrounding his death is one of the most brutal in all of church history. The accounts say Bartholomew carried the message into Armenia, into the mountains, and that he led the king's own brother to faith. And for that, he was sentenced to die. The oldest traditions disagree on the method, and I will not pretend they are certain, but the one that has echoed loudest through the centuries, the one painted by Michelangelo on the wall of the Sistine Chapel, says Bartholomew was flayed alive, skinned, and then beheaded. I am not going to dwell on the horror of that, because the horror is not the point. Here's the point. Bartholomew is the apostle we know almost nothing about. No famous speech, no dramatic gospel moment, a quiet man in the background, and even the quiet man in the background, the one with nothing to prove, the one no one would have remembered if he had simply gone home, even he would not take it back. That is what I need you to see before we reach the end. These were not leaders chasing glory. James got one cold sentence. Andrew was forever Peter's brother. Bartholomew barely spoke. These were ordinary, forgettable men. And ordinary, forgettable men do not invent a story and then let themselves be skinned alive defending it. So let me say it plainly, the way it deserves to be said. This is not a story about brave heroes who wanted to be remembered. This is not a story about fanatics chasing a cause. This is not a story about men who were too proud to admit they were wrong. This is a story about ordinary people who saw something and could not, would not, unsee it. 11 graves were filling up across the ancient world: Persia, Greece, India, Armenia, Rome, and every single one of them was being dug for the same reason. Now, I told you at the very beginning that one of these men would not get a grave like the others. One of them would grow old. It is time to meet him. His name was John, the brother of James. The same James we started with, the first to die by the sword. The two sons of thunder. One of them was the first of the 12 to be killed, and the other would be the last of the 12 to die at all. John was almost certainly the youngest. He is the one who called himself, with a kind of wonder he never got over, the disciple Jesus loved. And out of all of them, John has one detail attached to his name that none of the others can claim. When everyone else ran, John stayed. On the night Jesus was arrested, the Gospels tell us the disciples scattered into the dark. Peter followed at a distance and then denied him. But when you get to the cross, when you look at who is actually standing there at the foot of it, close enough to be handed responsibility for Jesus' own mother, it is John, the young one, the only one of the 12 the Gospels place at the crucifixion. While the others hid behind locked doors, John stood close enough to watch his friend die. Hold that thought, because it changes everything about how his story ends. Tradition says John was eventually arrested and brought to Rome, and that they tried to execute him. The old account from Tertullian says they threw him into a cauldron of boiling oil. And he came out alive, unharmed. Whether you take that literally or not, here is what every strand of tradition agrees on, and what makes John unique among all 12. They could not kill him, so Rome did the next best thing. They exiled him. They shipped an old man off to a small, rocky, volcanic island in the middle of the Aegean Sea, a place called Patmos, and left him there to be forgotten. This is the open door I left ajar at the very beginning, the one who grows old. It was always John. And here is the breathtaking part. Patmos was not the end of John's story. It was the setting for the most staggering vision in the entire Bible. It was on that lonely rock, the Bible tells us in its final book, that an old man, your brother and companion in suffering, he calls himself, heard a voice like a trumpet behind him and saw heaven torn open. The youngest disciple, the one who stood at the cross when everyone else ran, became the old man who saw the end of all things. He outlived every friend he ever buried, and then he wrote it all down. John died old, in Ephesus. Of old age, by every account we have, the only one of the 12 who was not murdered for what he believed. And I want you to feel the shape of that. The one disciple who did not run from the cross was the one disciple who did not have to die on one now. There is one man left at that table, and we have to talk about him because he is the reason this whole thing holds together. Judas. Judas Iscariot is the only one of the 12 whose death the Bible describes in detail, alongside James. And his death is different from all the others in the one way that matters most. Every other apostle died refusing to take it back. Judas died because he could not live with what he had done. He had walked with Jesus for 3 years. He had seen the same miracles, eaten the same bread, heard the same words, and he sold it for the price of a slave, and then he threw the silver on the temple floor and hanged himself. Here is why that matters. Judas is the control group. Judas proves these men were not brainwashed, not delusional, not incapable of betrayal. One of them did betray. One of them did break. The other 11 did not, and they had every chance to. At any moment, any one of them could have done what Judas did. Walked away, cut a deal, saved his own skin with 3 words. I made it up. Not one of them ever did. And this is where I have to ask you the question this whole thing has been building toward, because people die for things they believe all the time. History is full of them. Men have died for causes that turned out to be lies, for leaders who turned out to be frauds, for ideas that turned out to be wrong. That proves something powerful. It proves they believed. It does not prove the thing was true. But these men are different in one specific way, and you have to sit with it. These 11 men were not in a position to be sincerely mistaken. They were not believing a story someone told them. They were claiming to be eyewitnesses of a man who came back from the dead, a man they had watched die, a man they ate breakfast with on a beach afterward. Either that happened or it did not. And they were the ones who would know. So here is the human truth underneath all of it, the thing you already know in your bones. People will die for a lie they believe is true. That happens. But people do not die, slowly, brutally, with an easy way out the whole time for something they know is the lie. Liars make terrible martyrs. The moment the cross comes out, the moment the spear is raised, the man who made it up says, "Wait, stop. None of it was real." 11 men, 11 chances to say those words and walk home. 11 graves on 3 continents instead. That is not the silence of fanatics. That is the silence of witnesses who refuse to lie under oath, even when the penalty is death. So let me leave you with 3 things. Carry them out of here with you. The first is simple, and I promised you honesty, so here it is. Only 2 of these deaths are written in the Bible, James by the sword and Judas by his own hand. Everything else, the upside-down cross, the X-shaped cross, the spear in India, the skin in Armenia, the boiling oil, all of it comes from tradition, and some of it is sturdier than the rest. But the pattern underneath the details is something no honest person can wave away. These men scattered to the corners of the known world, and they died there, and they did not take it back. That much is history. The second one is for you personally. Ask yourself what you would die for, not what you would argue for online, not what you would post about, what you would let them kill you for slowly with a way out the whole time. Most of us have never had to find that line in ourselves. These men found it, and the thing they would not cross it for was not a feeling and not a hope. It was something they swore they had seen with their own eyes. And the third, here is the one I want you to take to bed tonight. Somewhere out there, scattered across the old world, there are graves. A hill in India, a city in Greece, a field in Armenia, a spot under a church in Rome. 11 of them, give or take. And every one of those graves is a signature. 11 men signed their names in their own blood at the bottom of a single statement. And the statement was this: we did not steal a body. We did not invent a story. We saw him. He was dead and then he was not, and we saw him. You can believe them or not. That has always been your choice, and it still is. But you cannot say they were comfortable. You cannot say they had nothing to lose. And you cannot say they were lying, because liars, every one of them, take the easy way out long before the spear goes in. So let me ask you, before you go, of all 12, the sword, the upside-down cross, the spear, the skin, the old man on the island. Whose death hit you the hardest? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone, and I think the answer says something about each of us. And if any of this moved you, made you sit a little straighter, made you want to know more, subscribe and stay. We are just getting started, you and I. There are a lot more rooms like that upstairs room left to walk into. 12 ordinary men sat around a table in the dark. 11 of them died rather than say it never happened. One of them grew old and saw heaven and wrote it down. And the only one who ever took it back was the only one who never really believed in the first place. The rest of them are still witnesses, even now, even from the ground,